On my 68th birthday, a strange package showed up at my doorstep. No return address, no warm message, just two cold words. Happy birthday. The second I saw the handwriting, I froze. It was a script burned into me belonging to the son I had raised for 2 decades. I hadn't laid eyes on him in 3 years. Inside the box was a rare collector's bottle of whiskey. The kind that looks more like something you'd put on a shelf than actually drink. But Ethan had no idea, or maybe he did, that I'd quit alcohol after my heart scare 3 years back. Instead of cracking it open, I decided to give it to Robert Hayes, his father-in-law. To me, it was just whiskey. Or so I believed until I discovered it nearly killed us both. And that was only the start. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I left the bottle sitting on the kitchen table. The early light cut through the blinds, slicing the room into stripes of shadow and gold. The glass gleamed like it was trapping fire. The label was a forest green with gold print, the kind that told you the packaging was worth more than the liquid. I ran my thumb over the red wax seal on the cork, its smooth surface catching on the ridges of my fingertips. Whiskey used to be my quiet indulgence. Not sloppy drinking, just one slow pour at the end of a long day after mending fence posts or cleaning out the shed. When Margaret was alive, she'd pour us both a glass after supper. Sundays we'd sit on the porch swing, listening to the cicadas until the air cooled. All of that ended when the heart attack took away my choices. I hadn't touched a drop since. Ethan knew that. He was sitting right there in the hospital chair when the doctor listed out everything I had to give up if I wanted to make it past 70. Ethan hadn't said a word, just stared at his phone, thumbs moving. I told myself he was distracting himself from the news. But now I'm not so sure. We never had that big movie-style fight with slammed doors and screaming. Instead, he just stopped showing up. First, he skipped Sunday dinner. Then he didn't bother with Thanksgiving. By the second Christmas without him, I had to admit we weren't speaking anymore. Silence had settled into a routine of its own. So when I saw his handwriting again, after all that time, something twisted inside me. Not happiness, not relief, just a heavy ache I couldn't put into words. The envelope taped to the side of the box was plain as printer paper. Inside was a single card, happy birthday, written in blue ink. No dad, no signature. Just those 2 words stranded like they were afraid to be part of a sentence. I didn't open the bottle. Didn't even let myself think about it. I pushed it across the table and went back to my coffee already cold in the mug. The wall clock ticked steady above the stove, making the house feel hollower. Robert Hayes came to mind. Robert is the kind of man who never pulls up without a tool set in his truck bed. A couple of summers ago, when a storm ripped half the shingles off my roof, he was up on a ladder by sunrise, hammer in hand, before I'd even finished my first cup of joe. He's not the sort to wait for you to ask for help. If anyone deserved something nice, it was Robert. And since I couldn't drink whiskey anymore, leaving it to collect dust felt wrong. Robert would pop it open, share it around, and give it a story. That sounded better than letting it sit behind glass. By afternoon, the bottle was buckled into the passenger seat of my old Chevy. I don't know why, habit maybe, but the thought of it rolling around on the ride over made me uneasy. The sun was already slanting low, painting the fields in that late October amber glow. Out along County Road 6. The soybean fields had been shaved down to stubble, the air tinged with smoke from someone's burn pile. Robert's place sits high at the edge of town, a white clapboard house with a wraparound porch straight off a postcard. I pulled in, gravel crunching killed the engine. He swung the door open before I knocked, red flannel shirt, worn jeans, boots dusted with sawdust. His eyes landed on the bottle. "Frank, what's this?" he asked, stepping forward. "From Ethan." "Yeah," I said, holding it out. "Figured you might get more out of it than I would." His eyebrows lifted as he read the label. "This is something, Frank. This is the kind of bottle you save for a special night, then decide tonight's the night I told him, and I meant it. He chuckled. I think I will. Thank you. It felt good placing it in hands that would actually value it. I slid back behind the wheel, the late sun spilling across the dash as I headed home. On the drive back, I couldn't shake the thought of that bottle, not because I wanted it, but because it didn't add up. Ethan was never the type to drop serious cash without a reason. When he was younger, he could barely keep gas in his tank without borrowing from me. So why now? Why a gift he knew I wouldn't touch? The question nagged at me until I pulled into my driveway. I told myself to let it go. Not everything has a hidden meaning, but I didn't buy it. That evening, I slow-cooked a pot roast, the house thick with the smell of onions and carrots. A meal made for company, though I sat down alone. By the time the wall clock neared 9, I was scrubbing the last dish when the phone rang. The landline hardly ever buzzed anymore. Hello, Dad. Ethan's voice smooth, casual, like no time had gone by. I leaned on the counter. Ethan. Happy birthday, he added, just a beat too slow to sound real. You got my gift, I did. Well, what did you think? It's a nice bottle. Did you try it yet? His voice carried a sharper edge. No, I gave it to Robert. Thought he'd get more out of it. Silence. Not static. Not a drop call. Just a heavy pause. You gave it to Robert? His tone went cold. That's right. I heard a measured exhale, slow and controlled. Huh. Then the line went dead. I stared at the receiver before setting it back in the cradle. The clock ticked on. My stomach churned not from dinner, but from something less concrete, the way he'd asked about that whiskey, like it mattered more than it should. I flipped the kitchen light off and went to bed. But rest didn't come easy. When it did, it was thin and restless, the kind that leaves you worn out by morning. The next day, I tried to shake it loose. I poured coffee, sat with the paper. But around noon, the phone rang again. Caller ID showed a local number I didn't know. Mr. Miller, a woman's voice said. Yes, this is Susan Hayes, Robert's wife. Her words were tight. I thought you should know Robert's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning. They think it might be poisoning. The mug in my hand turned cold instantly. Poisoning. He was fine last night, she said. We had a drink with dinner, and this morning he could barely stand. They're running tests. I didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the empty space on the counter where the whiskey had sat less than a day ago. Did he eat anything unusual, she asked. My throat felt dry. No, but I gave him a bottle yesterday. Whiskey. From Ethan. There was a pause, the hospital sounds filling the line, monitors beeping, wheels squeaking on tile. I'll tell the doctors, she said at last. If you remember anything else, call me. I promised I would, then hung up. The house pressed in around me, too quiet. Outside, October light had gone pale and flat. I didn't move for a long while. When I finally did, I walked to the trash bin. Something white caught my eye. At the bottom, a small plastic vial, like the kind vitamins come in. No label, just a dusting of powder inside. I didn't recall throwing it away. I picked it up. The cap was screwed tight. Opening the fridge, I spotted a mason jar on the middle shelf, half a cup of whiskey left over from the pour I'd given Robert before handing him the bottle. I'd forgotten it was there until that moment. My hands trembled as I set the jar next to the vial. Tom Willis came to mind. Tom and I had served together more than 30 years ago, and now he ran a small vet lab on the outskirts of town. He still owed me for pulling his truck out of a ditch one icy winter. I called him. Tom, I need you to test something for me. Quietly. What is it, whiskey? And maybe something else. He didn't press, just told me to meet him after closing. That evening, I drove out the mason jar wrapped in a paper bag on the seat. Tom met me in the lot, lab coat over a sweatshirt, disinfectant faint in the air. "This is the kind of favor I'll regret," he asked. "Just tell me what's in it," I said. He gave a quick nod, took the bag and slipped inside. I sat there with the truck idling, watching the sky dim. The radio stayed silent. My mind kept circling the past day, Ethan's handwriting, the bottle, his voice on the phone when I said I'd given it to Robert. That long pause that had weight behind it. My gut twisted. Tom called the following afternoon. "Frank, you're not going to like this. There's something in that whiskey. White snake root. Enough of it can stop a man's heart." I shut my eyes. The phone felt like a brick in my hand. "You said Robert drank this, yes. You didn't?" "No." He exhaled slow. "Then, you might have just dodged a bullet." And that's where this part of the story closes. Not with answers, but with a question that dragged me down roads I never thought I'd travel. Because when I hung up, I knew Ethan hadn't just mailed me a gift. He'd mailed me a warning. I used to think nothing was worse than a phone ringing after midnight. Turns out there is. It's the phone ringing when you already know deep down what it's going to say. When Tom hung up after confirming white snake root, the house went so still, it felt like it was listening. I didn't sit with it. I grabbed my jacket from the chair, slipped the truck keys from the hook by the door, and headed straight for St. Luke's. The drive into town was a string of stoplights and empty streets, one of those mornings where the sun shines hard but gives off no warmth. Out of habit, I parked at the far edge of the lot, walking quick, one hand buried in my pocket, the other pressed against my ribs, like I could hold myself steady. Hospitals all smell the same. Sterile air with a trace of burnt coffee. The lights always too white. A volunteer pointed me toward Robert's room. He didn't look like the man who once climbed onto my roof before I'd even asked. He looked shrunken, drained, his skin paler than the pillow propping him up. The monitors beside him pulsed and hummed in rhythm with a stubborn, slow heartbeat. Susan sat in a plastic chair drawn tight to the bed. She had the look I've seen plenty, the look of someone waiting for something to end. But it just won't. "Frank," she said, standing, "thank you for coming. How is he? They're trying to stabilize his heart rhythm." Her hands were clasped high against her chest, not praying, just holding on. Like keeping still could keep everything from slipping away. They said they found signs of a plant toxin. They're running more tests. I stepped closer to the bed. Robert's mouth moved with each thin breath in, each thin breath out. His hair, usually slicked neatly back, had fallen loose over his forehead, making him look both younger and more breakable. On paper, I wasn't family. But blood isn't the only thing that binds people. Sometimes it's the one who shows up with a tool belt before you've even thought to worry about the leak. "Did he eat anything unusual last night?" I asked. "Or drink something he doesn't normally? We both had one glass with dinner." She looked at me, the question already clear. "The bottle you brought." He said it was the best whiskey he'd ever tasted. He wanted to save the rest. My jaw clenched without me telling it to. "I need you to tell the doctors exactly that I said. Tell them it was sealed brand new. And tell them I can get them a small sample from the same bottle." She reached toward me like she'd take my hand, then stopped and held the rail instead. "Frank, what is this? Do you think I don't know? What I think I cut in half a lie? But I'm going to find out." The doctor entered, a man in his 50s, with a face trained not to flinch. He explained in calm, clipped tones, heart rhythms, enzymes, observation. He avoided what he didn't know, which was plenty. When he left, Susan lowered back into the chair, and I promised to call her with anything useful. She nodded, but it was hollow, a motion of the head, because her fists had already chosen not to let go. I walked out with my jaw locked and my hands buried deep in my jacket. The automatic doors opened, spilling me into October air that felt wrong. Bright as a postcard, cold as a sanctuary. I sat in the truck keys, half-turned, staring at my reflection in the rear view. A man with nothing left unbroken, that hadn't been cracked already. White snake root, I said aloud, testing the words like a carpenter tapping a board for warps. They felt sharp, intentional. On the way home, the road unwound like a tape I'd played too many times. I turned onto my street without noticing anything. The row of mailboxes, the mud at the corner, the dad raking leaves with his boy. I parked, locked the truck without thinking, and headed straight to the fridge. The mason jar with its splash of whiskey was still there, tucked behind the milk. I held it to the light, watching the amber twist in the glass as I tipped it. You'd never know by sight. You never do. The worst poisons come dressed as something harmless. I set it down by the sink and crossed to the trash. I'd tossed that little white vial yesterday. The bag was still there. I hadn't taken it out. Old man living alone trash doesn't fill quick. I lifted the lid, looked inside, and froze. The bag had been shifted, turned around backward, and the vial was gone. My eyes moved to the door. The deadbolt was set like I'd left it. Windows shut and latched. I never keep spare keys under mats or rocks. I don't keep spares anywhere a fool would look. Still, someone had been inside. I could feel it the way you sense a room's been rearranged even if you can't name what's out of place. I pulled in a slow breath through my nose and let it out steady. Not panic. Panic is loud and useless. I needed something steady to hang on to. I picked up the phone and called Tom. "It's gone," I said when he picked up. "That little vial I told you about. Someone pulled it out of my trash. I didn't move it. I know every motion I make in this house." He didn't suggest I was imagining things. Tom understood the cost of brushing off what your gut already screams. "You need to bring law enforcement in. I can verify what's in the whiskey, but that vial would have been solid proof of tampering." "I know," I told him. "I will. And Frank, yeah. Don't let whoever did this think you're asleep on it." "I'm not," I said and cut the line. I brewed coffee I had no taste for and sat at the table with a yellow legal pad. Writing steadies me. I drew a line down the page, what I know on the left, what I can prove on the right. Under what I know, Ethan sent the bottle. Ethan asked if I'd drunk it. Ethan's voice shifted when I said I gave it to Robert. Whiskey Tom tested contained white snake root. Under what I can prove, Tom's lab results. The leftover sample in the mason jar. The phone call with Ethan last night, if memory holds. Then I stared at the columns, wishing for a bridge to appear between them. But bridges don't just show up. You build them. I dug an old digital recorder out of the desk drawer. It was cheap, scratched at the corners, but reliable. The battery read half full. I slipped it into my jacket's inside pocket, the weight pressing against my chest like a reminder to breathe. Just after noon, I steered into Ethan's subdivision. His place sat in a neat row of lookalikes, neutral siding, brass address plates, porch lights that clicked on at dusk. His truck gleamed in the drive, newer and cleaner than mine by 10 years. I walked up the path and knocked. He opened the door with a face that flipped surprise, then calculation, then something he thought passed for warmth. "Dad," he said, tone balanced between expecting me and clueless about why I'd come. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" I asked, stepping inside before he could block me. The house smelled of lemon cleaner, nothing else. He always kept things squared away, every angle precise. The only items out were coffee table books, meant to show taste, not use. "I heard about Robert," he said, shutting the door. "Scary. Susan's with him now. Doctors think it's a virus." "Is that what they think?" I kept my voice flat. Push too hard, he'd dig in. Show weakness, he'd exploit it. That's what she said. That's what they're saying. I walked toward the kitchen. On the counter sat 3 unopened bottles, 2 bourbon, 1 rye lined up tidy. None were the brand he'd sent. I looked back. He was watching me watch, and he smiled the kind of smile built to impress more than connect. "Did you try the bottle you sent me?" I asked. He let out a soft laugh. The whole point was for you to enjoy it. For your birthday. I don't drink anymore. People change, he said with a shrug, dismissing me like background noise. I stepped closer to the counter, running a finger along the rim of an empty glass by the sink, the way a man might fidget while waiting on coffee. Robert liked it, I said. Said his favorite pour was the one off the middle shelf, the single malt. He blinked once slower than instinct. Yeah. Funny thing, I added, feeling the recorder in my pocket steady as a pulse. I never told you where it was kept. For the briefest moment he froze the way an animal stills at a branch snap. Then his mouth tilted in a practiced smirk, and he gave a little laugh. You must have. You get chatty when you're sentimental. I didn't, I said, holding his eyes until he had to choose whether to stare back or look away. He picked a third route. He grabbed a dish towel and began wiping down a glass that was already dry. Dad, he said, focusing on the glass instead of me. You always overthink. You're always fixing something no one asked you to. You sent me a $500 bottle I can't drink, I said. I'm trying to fix that. He set the glass aside and spread his hands wide, a gesture meant to look innocent. Then maybe don't. Maybe give me the benefit of the doubt for once. His voice could sound reasonable to anyone who hadn't heard it practiced for 3 decades. My son had a gift for sounding genuine when it was anything but. That pause from last night sat heavy between us, like an unseen third party perched on the counter. I'm going to ask you a question, I said, and I'm going to let the silence after it tell me the answer. He looked at me like we were playing chess, and I'd just announced my move. Okay. Did you tamper with that whiskey silence? If you use it right, silence is alive. The fridge hummed. The microwave clock ticked from 12:09 to 12:10. A car rolled past outside, slow enough that the tires hummed against the blacktop. Ethan held my gaze, saying nothing. Goodbye, Ethan, I said, because sometimes walking out is the only statement that matters. He called after me, Dad, in that tone that's both a plea and a warning. I stopped, but I didn't turn. You keep accusing me of things, you'll push me away, he said. I'm not accusing. I answered the door. I'm collecting. Outside, the air tasted sharp with a tang of metal. I slid into my truck and pressed the recorder's stop button with my thumb. The red light blinked out. I placed it on the passenger seat, staring at it like it was a witness I might have to call later. My hand stayed steady. My head didn't. I didn't go home. Not right away. I pulled into the far corner of a grocery store lot, where no one parks unless they want to be left alone, and made the call I'd been dodging ever since Tom said the words, white snake root. Detective Reyes, a voice answered after 2 rings. Detective, my name is Frank Miller. I believe I may have information about a poisoning. I have a sample of the substance and an audio recording that might interest you. He didn't press me for details on the phone. Men who know their work don't expect the whole story in one breath. Can you come in this afternoon? He asked. Yes, I said. I can. He gave me a time and an office number tucked away in a back hall of the station. When I hung up, I rested my hands on the wheel and stared forward. The grocery store's automatic doors kept opening for nobody and closing for nobody else. People shuffled in and out with paper bags full of apple's milk and the makings of dinners. I remembered when that had been my routine. Back at the house, I checked the mailbox because sometimes doing something small and ordinary keeps the weight from crushing you. Flyers, one bill a grocery ad, and a postcard from a dealership that thought I'd bite at 0% financing. Inside, I sealed the mason jar in a Ziploc bag, slid it into an old cigar tin I used for nails, and tucked the recorder in beside it. I put that tin into a paper sack with handles, then nested that bag inside another. After something vanishes from your trash, once doubling up feels less like paranoia and more like survival. I called Susan. She answered on the second ring, voice hushed. Frank. I'm going to the police, I said. I have a sample and something else. Robert's resting, she told me. They've got him on a monitor. He keeps waking up and asking what day it is. I tell him, and he nods like he's not sure whether to believe me. I'll call you after I meet with the detective, I promised. Tell him I'll stop by after if he wants to see an old face that isn't asking him to be strong. She gave a short, breathless laugh. He likes being asked to be strong, she said, but he likes you more. I checked the locks on the doors and windows one more time before leaving. The paper bag sat on the passenger seat like company. I buckled it in because habit offers comfort when logic doesn't. On the drive to the station, I turned on the radio but didn't hear it. People were singing about simple things. First it irritated me, then it exhausted me, then it just emptied me out. The station was cooler than the hospital and smelled cleaner. Reyes met me in a narrow office with a window that stared at a brick wall. He was much younger than me, but not green, sharp eyes, a tie tugged straight more than once today. He offered me water. I said yes, partly because my throat was dry, and partly because people notice when you refuse every kindness. He waited until I swallowed before asking his first question. Tell me about the whiskey. So I did. I laid out the timeline, the words Ethan used, the pause that hadn't felt like surprise. I left out theories. I gave him the index cards of facts and let him stack them in his own order. Then I set the paper sack on his desk, opened the cigar tin and laid the mason jar and recorder on his blotter, like tools at the start of a job. He didn't touch them yet. Instead, he asked questions that sounded small, but weren't. Who else has keys to your house? When did you last check the trash? Did you mention the vial to anyone besides Tom? Then he lifted the recorder, weighing it in his hand, like a man considering how heavy words might be once spoken out loud. You understand, he said. This doesn't become a case because you and I both have a hunch. It becomes a case when what you've given me can hold up once other people start looking at it. I do, I answered. I want other people to look at it. He nodded. We'll send the liquid to the state lab. We'll copy your audio. If there's cause, we'll act. If not, we'll tell you exactly why we can't. You okay with that? I am, I said, and I meant it. I wasn't interested in seeing the wrong man punished. What I wanted was the right truth laid bare. When I stood to leave, he said my name like he was trying it on for weight. Mr. Miller? Yes. Don't speak to your son again until I tell you. If he contacts you, write down the time and his words. Keep your answers shorter than his questions. I nodded, struck by the strange relief of someone else finally willing to shoulder part of the load I'd been dragging. Outside, the afternoon was washed out gray, the kind of light that stings your eyes more than it guides you. I drove straight to the hospital. Susan sat in the same chair, the same machines humming their slow electronic hymns. Robert looked more himself than yesterday. His face held a trace of color again, and the set of his mouth was looser around the steady rhythm of breath. I touched the rail, and his eyes fluttered open. You look like hell, he whispered. You should see yourself, I said. He smiled with just the corner of his mouth, the way men do when a full smile costs too much effort. I heard you're making friends with the police, he said. I'm trying to make sure they're standing on our side when they show up, I replied. He shut his eyes, gave a small nod, and drifted. I stayed longer than necessary, listening to the machine keep his heart accountable. Susan murmured things meant only for him. Out in the hall, I called Tom to thank him for moving quicker than I had any right to expect. He told me that's what friends are for, then warned me to watch my back. I told him I would. At home, the house was exactly as I'd left it, which felt almost insulting. The silence spread through the rooms like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. I made myself an omelet, ate half, and washed the pan, because some habits are less about hunger and more about proving you're still the same man who carries them out. From the hall closet, I pulled down the fireproof box and set it on the kitchen table. Inside were the papers of a life birth certificates, the house deed, and Margaret's rose gold wedding ring I still couldn't part with. I stuck a note to the inside lid. Whiskey sample with police. Do not discard. I didn't know who I wrote it for. Maybe it was for me. That night I slept on the couch with the hall light burning. I hadn't done that since the night after my heart attack, and my chest didn't like how those two memories stood side by side. I woke before dawn. The body doesn't forget old alarms. I brewed coffee I didn't drink and listened to the house settle and breathe. When the sun finally dragged itself up, I called Susan and told her I'd stop by around noon. She said the doctor thought Robert might be moved out of critical care if his numbers kept holding. Behaving a word for toddlers and for heartbeats, I liked the sound of it. By mid-morning, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it roll to voicemail. Yesterday had taught me something: you don't owe anyone an answer before you're ready to give it. The message landed after the second ring. I waited, then pressed play. Dad, it's me. Ethan's voice pulled tight as wire. We need to talk. Sooner is better than later. He paused. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I wrote down the time and his exact words and tucked the note into the fireproof box, because sometimes you have to create your own evidence. I stared out the window at my stubborn yard that refused to stay green no matter how much water I gave it. The porch swing creaked once. No breeze in sight. The day had gone too quiet again. If you want me to say I wasn't afraid, I won't. Fear isn't something I run from anymore. It belongs to the truth the way screws belong to lumber. They bind it together. I stood in my kitchen with my palm resting on the back of a chair and knew one thing without needing to jot it down. Whatever this had become, it was past the point of a father and son talking it out over a table in softer voices. It was past the point where a bottle could still be called a gift or a hospital. Just a place that happened to someone else. This was only going to deepen before it eased. And I would keep walking into it, one room, one call, one steady breath at a time. There's a silence that doesn't sit. It paces, it taps against your mug. It stares at the phone on the counter and counts seconds with you, then starts again. Reyes told me not to speak with my son, so I didn't call Ethan back. I logged the time of his voicemail like I was writing down a license plate. By morning, I had followed the detective's order exactly, and still the house felt observed. I left the phone on the hall table and walked each room with my hands clasped behind me. Not because I expected to find anything, but because men like me don't sit if there's standing to do, don't rest if there's work left undone. The October light came through weaker that day, like a thin sheet drawn across the sun. I checked the back door, the garage side entrance with its tricky lock you have to lift as you turn, and every window latch. Everything in place, everything normal. But normal doesn't equal safe. I brewed a second pot of coffee I didn't drink, then opened the fireproof box on the kitchen table. Inside were the documents of a life, the deed stacks of insurance papers, Margaret's wedding ring, and the index card, where I'd written Ethan's voicemail, word for word. I added a new card. Detective Reyes, 2:30 p.m., underlined twice. All morning, I'd put off calling the station not out of reluctance, but because I wanted to show up with the kind of steadiness a day could earn you. Before I left, I made one last circle of the house. In the front hall, I stopped. The deadbolt sat aligned with the strike plate, but a new scrape gleamed on the edge of the metal, just the kind of mark a poorly cut key leaves after a few uses. Nothing broken, nothing forced, just the kind of detail you see only if you know your door the way you know your own hand. The thought planted itself in my chest and refused to move. Someone had let themselves in. From the junk drawer, I took a piece of thread and clear tape. I stretched the thread across the bottom of the door frame and fixed it in place. A trick an old corporal once showed me when he was sick of finding his locker tampered with. You don't catch the intruder. You just find out whether he's been there. As I pulled away in the truck, the house looked quiet and harmless, exactly the way a house is supposed to. Still, I backed out like I was leaving a sleeping animal. St. Luke's sat 3 turns and 1 long straight from the station, and I carried the weight of the hospital with me down the hall to Reyes's office. His office was the kind they give middle-rank, small-window, oversized desk piles of case files that looked like they multiplied in the dark. He stood, shook my hand, and motioned me into a chair. He didn't look like a man who'd been up too late or one who'd rested too well. He looked like a man who knew how to handle a clean fact. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Miller," he said. "And for the samples yesterday. We've sent them to the state lab. Your friend Tom's preliminary results match what we've seen. We're treating this seriously." "I assume seriously has levels," I said. He nearly smiled. "It does. Right now it means we're gathering corroboration, the hospital's tox panel, your audio, the chain of custody on your sample." He slid a legal pad toward me. "I want your timeline in your own words. When you received the package, when you gave it to Mr. Hayes, when your son called, when you found the vial missing." I told him straight through, watching his pen move across the pad. He only stopped to confirm a date or time. When I was done, he tapped the page with the side of his pen and leaned back. "You said the trash bag had been disturbed, turned around the wrong way. I didn't move it. Any sign of forced entry? Anyone else with keys? No spares hidden? I haven't given one out lately. My late wife had hers. My son had one when he was younger. When's the last time you saw it in his possession?" The answer wanted to be a lifetime ago. But the truth showed up wearing a hospital gown, 5 years earlier after my heart attack, when Ethan had come by the house to grab a few things before I was discharged. He'd brought slippers, sweatpants, and my phone charger. At the time, I'd told him, "Thank you for the small mercy of remembering the charger. I never asked for my keys back. I assumed I'd left them on the counter." After my heart attack, I said slowly, "He had them then. I don't recall him handing them back." Reyes nodded, not surprised, not pleased. If someone entered without force, that helps explain the missing vial. Did anyone else know about the vial? Just Tom. I'll ask him to write down his side of that conversation so no one can say we made it up after the fact. He closed the pad. "Mr. Miller, I'll say this plainly. Don't meet your son. If he asks you anywhere, call me. If he shows up, notify us. I don't think he's after a conversation." I thought about Ethan's voicemail. His voice wound tight like a cable under a hood you'd be a fool to touch while the engine's still hot. "I'll do exactly what you say." He slid a card across the desk. "My cell. If you sense something is off, call. I'd rather be wrong twice than right too late." I appreciate that I said standing. He did too. On the way out, the building smelled of toner and wax. I took the stairs down 2 flights and stopped on the landing just to breathe. I wasn't winded. I was making sure the ground under me felt the same as when I came in. Susan called as I was pulling into the hospital garage. I answered on the second ring. "Frank, he's better," she said, her words trembling. "They're moving him out of critical into step down. He keeps apologizing every time he wakes up, like he thinks he ruined someone's party." "It'll be a party when he's home," I said. "Can I stop by?" Robert looked pale but solid, propped up now, eyes clearer. He reached for my arm in that old working man's handshake, locking past the wrist. "You look worse today," he said, making Susan laugh through the tissue at her chin. "I brought my worst for this visit," I said, pulling a chair close. "I'll bring my better tomorrow." Susan excused herself to talk with a nurse. When the curtain whispered closed, Robert lowered his voice. "Frank, between us." He glanced at the door, then back. "You think Ethan did this? I think that bottle wasn't a gift." He studied my face like he was trying to learn a new language from it. "You're going to be all right handling that." "I'm going to be lawful," I said. "I'm going to be steady." That's not what I asked. I let the silence work long enough to show I'd heard him. I'm going to be all right handling it. He squeezed my forearm once before letting go. Men like us don't hug unless it's graveside. A squeeze is permission to feel without the paperwork. The curtain slid open again, and Susan stepped in with a younger woman beside her mid-30s, hair pulled into a ponytail. Eyes ringed with fatigue but sharp. I knew her from framed photos on Ethan's mantel. Leah, my daughter-in-law. We'd spoken twice since the wedding, politely, the way neighbors on separate blocks might. "Frank," she said, I'm glad you're here." I stood. "How are you holding up?" She glanced at Robert. "Scared, angry. Mostly scared." Her voice dropped. "We need to talk." Susan brushed Robert's hand and said, "I'll give you 2 a minute," before stepping into the hall. A woman who knows when to give privacy, even if she wasn't the one who asked. Leah motioned toward the small family lounge around the corner. The place had a coffee machine that made everything taste like burnt plastic and 2 stiff-backed chairs that weren't built for kindness. She stayed standing. So did I. "I don't know what you know," she said, "but I know Ethan's been different for a while. Distant, secretive. He keeps jars on a shelf in the garage, dried plants. Says it's a hobby. He's joined online groups about herbal extraction." I didn't think... She swallowed. "I didn't think it tied to anything like this." "White snake root," I said. "Have you heard that name?" Her eyes flicked recognition, fear, maybe both. "Yes. I've seen it in his search history. I thought he was just reading, that's all. Detective Reyes will want to talk to you if you're willing." She nodded too quickly. "I already called. I left a message." "Good," I said. Relief and grief come from the same bloodline. I felt one paying a visit for the other. "Leah, if you have anything, screenshots, texts, pictures of those jars, hang on to them." Let the detective pull the thread. She stared at me long enough to see through me. "Why would he do this to you?" I could have listed a dozen answers. Money I wouldn't hand over. Love I didn't give the way he wanted it. Resentments that grew barbs. Instead, I told the truth the way I knew it. Because if he can't own the story, he'll burn the page. She flinched, like my words had carried a chill. "He asked me this morning if I'd heard from you. He said he wanted to know if you liked the bottle." "What did you tell him? That you'd given it to my father?" We stood with that sentence between us, the kind of thing that shifts shape the longer you look at it. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me." "I'm sorry," she said. And I believed she meant it all, not just the piece she'd spoken. We returned to Robert's room and made small talk about the weather, football, and the cafeteria's version of chicken noodle soup. I left when the nurse came to check his vitals, promising to bring magazines and pretending that mattered. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store. I bought 2 new deadbolts and a package of peel and stick alarms that shriek when a door opens after they're set. The cashier rang me up and made a crack about winter coming early. I said something about trying to stay ahead of it. He bagged the locks like groceries and told me, "Have a good day." We say that to each other. Have a good day, if the day will listen. At home, the thread I'd taped across the door frame was untouched. I stepped over it, closed the door softly behind me. I'd thought about calling a locksmith, but installing the locks myself felt like making your own bed in a roadside motel. Do it yourself. Maybe then you can rest. I put the first deadbolt on the back door, then the second on the front, driving the screws in, slow and firm, the weight in my arms familiar. The little alarms went on with a sound like a bandage peeling away. I tested them, set open the door, let the shriek prove they'd work. They did. By the time I finished, the sun had dropped low enough to stretch shadows long across the floor. I heated a can of soup and ate its standing bowl in one hand, spoon in the other, less to wash. The phone buzzed on the hallway table. I didn't flinch. I walked to it like a man answering his door. Unknown number again. I let it buzz until it quit. Seconds later, a text appeared. "Ethan, we need to talk face to face today." Another followed before I could think about the first. Ethan, don't make this worse than it is. I set the phone down like it might scorch my hand. I wrote the time and the messages word for word on an index card and slid it into the fireproof box. Then I pulled Detective Reyes's card from my wallet and dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Reyes. It's Miller, I said. He's asking to meet. Do not, Reyes said, 2 words clean as a gate closing. Forward me the texts. I'll log them. If he calls, let it go to voicemail. He left one earlier. I've transcribed it. Good. Keep doing that. I hesitated. Detective, would you come by and take a look at my front door? I think someone's used a key that wasn't mine. I can send an officer to photograph and document. I'll come by if I'm clear in the next hour. He showed up 40 minutes later with a young officer named Patel. They took photos of the strike plate, the faint scrape where the key had rubbed, and the thread I'd taped low across the frame like a tripwire. Reyes didn't flinch. He wasn't a man who enjoyed being right, but he also didn't waste effort pretending to be surprised when he wasn't. Do you have the original set of keys? He asked. I went to the hall closet, pulled down the little tin where we'd kept spares 20 years back. Inside were 2 brass keys, labeled front and back, in my wife Margaret's tidy handwriting. Beside them was another, a copy with no mark, its cut slightly off, sitting awkward in the tin. My gut went cold. This wasn't ours, I said. We never leave keys unlabeled. We label everything. Reyes had Patel bag it. We'll see if we can pull prints. No promises. Keys aren't friendly to fingerprints. Do what you can, I said. I'd like every little thing in this story to stop pretending it's not tied to the rest. When they left, the house felt altered. Not safer, not less exposed, just acknowledged. When the official world steps into your private one, the ground shifts, then steadies at a new tilt. I sat at the kitchen table, both hands around an empty mug. The porch swing creaked. No wind I could see. I listened for footsteps that never came. I set the phone to do not disturb and flipped it face down. When I was a boy, I thought being grown meant nobody could tell me what to do. Now it means I know exactly who's worth listening to. Around 9, a car idled outside long enough that I rose and stood at the window. Headlights cut across the porch, then moved on. I stayed there until the sound faded into nothing. Maybe it was nothing, a kid turned around, a driver checking an address. Still, it felt like something testing whether I'd twitch. I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch, hall light burning, boots by the door. I'm too old for theatrics, not too old to be ready. Just before dawn, the phone buzzed again. Voicemail, no ring. I'd forgotten do not disturb. I played it soft. Dad, you're making a mess of this. Ethan's voice quieter, like he didn't want the walls to hear. You went to the cops. That's not smart. We could have handled this. You're not thinking straight. Then he hung up. I wrote it down. We could have handled this. Loaded words. Handled what? At 8 sharp, Reyes called. State lab came back preliminary. Independent confirmation of white snake root in your sample. It's enough to formally open a case and request medical records from the hospital for Mr. Hayes. We're moving. I let go of a breath that had been lodged in me since Tom first said snake root. Tell me what you need. Keep doing what you're doing. Document. Do not engage. Lock your doors. I'll be in touch for a formal statement under recording. If your son reaches out, save everything. If he shows up, call 911. I mean that. I know you do, I said. Detective, yes, thank you. He didn't say you're welcome. We'll do our jobs. From a man like him, that meant the same thing. I showered, shaved, and put on a clean shirt. A man ought to look the part when the day will demand steadiness. I made breakfast and ate it at the table, each bite a choice I was glad to get right. I drove to the hospital with a stack of magazines under my arm, home repair glossy spreads of gardens that could never grow in Missouri clay. Robert was awake enough to pretend interest in an article about chainsaw safety. We both knew he was humoring me, and that was its own kind of kindness. Leah walked in halfway through an article on deck maintenance. She had her phone clutched in her hand, looking like someone who'd spent nights near a bed, but not in one. "Detective Reyes called me," she said. "He wants me to bring in Ethan's old laptop. I still have it from before we got married." "Bring it," I said. "Let the law carry what it's meant to carry." She nodded. "Frank?" "He texted me," she said, eyes lowered. "He asked if you were playing hero. He said, if anything happens, it's on you." She lifted her eyes. I forwarded the text to Reyes. "Good," he said. A heat climbed in my chest, not the old kind, but the kind that knows the line between a threat and a warning. You don't answer anything he sends. Not one word. Not even to say you won't be answering. When I stepped outside, the light had the thin honesty of midday. I drove home the long way. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted more distance before the next thing showed up. The thread across the doorframe was still intact. I stepped over it like it was a vow I meant to keep and closed the door behind me. I sat at the table with a yellow pad and wrote across the top, "What does he want?" in letters large enough to claim the page. Then I drew 2 columns: money, control. Under money, I wrote last winter, 20,000 refused. Under control, I wrote bottle missing vial calls, we need to talk. Control weighed heavier. Money is a motive. Control is a pattern. Patterns last longer. Around noon, the cheap alarm at the door shrieked high and sharp. I was halfway out of my chair, phone in hand, before my head caught up and told my body I'd overreacted. The alarm sounded again, proving the little gadget I bought could do its job. I slid out of sight by the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. A delivery truck. The driver propped open the storm door to leave a padded envelope on the mat. He eyed the alarm, shrugged like a man who'd heard worse racket 100 times, and stepped back. The door clicked shut. The alarm silenced. I let my pulse return to where it belonged and waited. When the truck left, I opened the door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper. No words. Just a photo printed from a phone my porch taken last night from across the street. The swing sat still. The porch light glowed. No person in frame. The photo had been snapped less than 12 hours earlier. I looked toward the street, the hedges by the neighbor's yard, the corner spot where a car could park dark and see everything it wanted. I carried the photo straight to the fireproof box, added it to the stack, and called Reyes. He answered on the first ring. I told him what arrived, how it came, what it showed. "Do not throw that away," he said. "I'll send someone." "You're going to get tired of hearing from me," I said. "I'd prefer that to the alternative," he answered, hanging up quick, making it less a conversation and more a task. I stood off to the side of the window, watching the street like it was something wild I didn't want to spook. The porch swing shifted once. No wind. Houses are like that. What you think is still always finds a way to move. By late afternoon, police had the photo, my statement, and the envelope too. Reyes texted, "We're filing preservation requests for camera footage on your block." Practical words. The kind that lay down rails. Evening came like a slow closing door. I heated leftover soup and ate it on the back steps, October air sharp and clean in my lungs. The yard fell dark, the swing stayed still, and somewhere far off a dog barked at something only dogs can see. I went inside and flipped on the hall light. The phone buzzed once more. "Ethan, you think they'll keep you safe from what you started? Call me." I didn't. I copied it word for word and slid it into the box. The lid closed with its usual soft, final sound. I set it back on the highest shelf the way a man sets down a weight so he won't trip over it in the night. I stood and listened to the house talk to itself, the settle of the wood, the faint hum of the fridge, the steady tick of a clock that knows nothing about meaning. I thought of the first time Ethan said "Dad" in a way that made my chest want to stand tall, and the last time he said it in a way that made it want to fold. Full dark by the time I stretched out on the couch. I laid my palm flat on my chest, Felt my heart working slow, steady, professional. Long ago, a doctor told me I'd know if I was in trouble. Tonight it felt like the truest thing I had left. I don't know if sleep came or if the night decided to show mercy. But when the phone rang at 6:12 a.m., I was already ready. I picked up on the first ring. Mr. Miller Reyes said. No. Hello. State lab confirmed. We're filing for a warrant. I shut my eyes and saw the porch swing the white thread across the threshold, the photo of my own house from across the street. I saw the bottle catching morning light like it was shame trapped in glass. Where do you need me? I asked. Right where you are, he said. And whatever happens next, don't open the door unless the person on the other side can prove they're here to help. The line went quiet. The house listened. And I stood inside the little country I'd built within my walls and waited for the day to cross the threshold. They say the knock that comes out of nowhere is the one that sticks with you. But this time I was waiting for it. I'd been waiting ever since Reyes told me the lab had confirmed the poison. Still, when it landed sharp, deliberate, my chest pulled tight. Not from fear, but from knowing the invisible line we'd been walking in the dark was about to be drawn in permanent ink. That sound meant the warrant had real weight now. The day wasn't going to hold back until I felt ready. Just after 8 a.m., the light outside had that thin gold that barely touches the grass before it slips away. I opened the door. Reyes stood there with two uniforms, Patel the same from before, and a younger officer whose belt still seemed oversized on him. They were dressed for work that wasn't going to stay in the paperwork. Morning, Mr. Miller Reyes said, lifting a folded document in a clear sleeve. Judge signed off at 7:43. We have authority to search your son's residence and seize any items relevant to the case. He didn't need to explain further. This was the step where everything could tilt. Do you need me there? I asked. No, he said. And that's not a request. It's an instruction. We don't want you in his line of sight today. We'll handle the search. If we find what we think we'll find, we'll proceed accordingly. Proceed accordingly is cop speak for your life might not look the same by dinner time. Patel glanced over my shoulder toward the hallway. Any changes overnight? The threads are still there. No alarms went off. Reyes gave a short nod. Good. Keep them in place. I'll have one of our techs put in a proper camera system before the week's out. They left in a convoy black sedan first, then a marked cruiser trailing like punctuation at the end of a sentence still being written. I stood at the doorway until they disappeared around the corner. Then I shut the door and looked at the thread stretched low along the frame, perfectly still, like it was daring someone to cross it. The hours after they left stretched long. I tried reading. The words on the page sat there like strangers at a bus stop. I made coffee. Let it go cold. Around 11, I drove slowly toward the edge of town and stopped at Veterans Memorial Park, where the benches face a fountain that hasn't run since last summer. Traffic from Main Street was faint enough that the air felt quiet. I'd been here once with Ethan when he was 10. We'd brought bread for the ducks. He asked me about the names etched on the plaques. I told him they were for men and women who had done their jobs until the very end. He asked if that meant they'd finished the mission. I said yes. He never asked me what the mission was. Sometimes I think that's the part I should have explained. By 1 o'clock, I was back home sitting at the kitchen table with my phone face up. I wasn't expecting him to call. Ethan's not the kind who reaches out when he's cornered. He's the kind who shows up uninvited and makes sure the conversation happens on his terms. That's what had Reyes worried. At 1:17, the phone buzzed. Not a call, a text from Leah. Leah, they're here. I'm in the bedroom with the door shut. I can hear them going through the garage. I wrote back. Stay inside. Don't interfere. You're safe with them there. No reply came. I pictured her sitting on the bed's edge, hands clasped tight, listening to boots on concrete and the sound of boxes shifting. I knew that sound, the sound of people looking for the truth without caring if they woke the house. At 2:04, Reyes called. We found it. I let the words sink. Found what 3 mason jars labeled with masking tape, BUSR root talc tincture. 2 contain dried plant material consistent with white snake root. The third has liquid. We'll send it to the lab. We also found handwritten notes on preparation methods, dosage estimates. He paused. And an envelope addressed to you, unsealed. Inside a short letter. Your name at the top, the words, "You'll understand why when it's over," at the bottom. The paper showed nothing but a rough tree sketch roots circled. The kitchen felt colder. Reyes's voice came steady. We'll log it, bag it, and photograph everything. Leah is cooperating fully. She's consented to search the devices. Do you have him in custody? I asked. Not yet. He wasn't home. We're putting out a locate. If he comes to you, call 911 immediately. Don't engage him. We're moving from suspicion to evidence, Mr. Miller. That changes the game. I hung up, added a note to the fireproof box. 4 p.m. Reyes called jars, notes letter. Each card was proof the last month wasn't a nightmare. Around 3:30, I phoned Linda. Robert was asleep. She listened quietly like the time I called from the ER after my heart attack. Frank, she said, this ends one of 2 ways. He'll be arrested or he'll run. He won't run far, I told her. No, but far enough to make you wonder. At 4:12, the alarm shrieked. I moved fast. Front door intact. Sound came from the back. Through the kitchen window, the screen door swayed, then stilled. A folded paper was wedged in the handle. Stop letting them in, or I will. No name, no envelope. I photographed it, sealed it, and called Reyes. Patel arrived in 10 minutes, logged everything, then left with the note. That night, I didn't sleep on the couch. I sat in a corner chair, both doors and view lights on, so anyone outside could see me. At 9:45, my phone buzzed, unknown number. I let it ring out. The voicemail, Dad, it's me. They're making a mistake. Those things they found, they're not what they think. You know me better than that. Call me, please. The voice was calm, almost persuasive. I didn't call back, I just wrote it down. Morning frost glazed the yard. At 8:12, Reyes texted, "We have him. Brought in without incident." By noon, I was at the station, small waiting room vending machine humming. Reyes came out. He's not talking. Lawyered up quick. Doesn't matter. We've got enough emails about root prep searches on adult toxicity over 60. We'll present charges, attempted murder, possession of a toxic substance, tampering with evidence. It'll move fast. Reyes studied me. You holding up, I'm standing, I said. That's enough. Leaving the station, the sky had that flat gray that makes you think snow's near, even when the forecast says no. I drove aimlessly past the mill, the empty hardware store, the old diner, then landed at the hospital. Robert watched a muted game show. Linda knit beside him. They got him, I told them. Robert nodded once. Linda didn't stop knitting. What now? She asked. Now we wait, I said. That night, I sat on the back steps with tea, listening to the wind crack branches. I thought about the note, the jars, the letter with roots, and that day years ago, when Ethan asked if names on plaques meant the mission was complete. Maybe my mission wasn't to finish, but to survive it. Inside, I checked the thread on the door, still there. Poison is a word that changes the air around you. Reyes hadn't said it first. Gary had. 2 days after Robert collapsed, the phone rang while I made oatmeal. Frank, you sitting down? He asked. I'm down. Talk. I ran the tests twice. It's white snake root in that whiskey, enough to send someone with a bad heart to the ICU. This wasn't an accident. My stomach dropped. Call Reyes. He needs to know now. Already on it, Gary said. Keep your phone close. I logged it in the fireproof box, 8:43 a.m. Gary confirmed poison. Seconds later, Reyes called. I just spoke with Gary. I'm on my way. We'll need the bottle and your statement. 15 minutes later, he was at my door, plain clothes badge on his belt. Where is it? I pointed to the cabinet. He lifted the sealed bottle with gloved hands like it might blow. You haven't opened it, no. I was saving it for Robert. Reyes studied the label and serial number. These editions are traceable. If Ethan bought it, we can follow the trail. If someone bought it for him. He didn't finish. Then, they're just as guilty, I said. We sat at the table going over Ethan's gift, his handwriting, and my choice to hand it to Robert. I repeated Ethan's last words, "One day you'll regret siding with him over me." Reyes wrote it down. That's motive, he said. Not new. I answered. The method is, that afternoon I visited Robert. He was pale but awake, TV low, Linda knitting by his side. They found poison in the whiskey, I whispered. His brows drew tight. White snake root. Gary tested twice. Linda froze mid-stitch. Frank, I didn't know, I said. Robert shook his head. You didn't pour it. Don't blame yourself. Still, I felt the weight on the drive home. At a red light, I thought of the day Ethan was born, his small hand gripping mine, and then the hand that wrote those words on the package. The next day, Gary called again. White snake root isn't easy to get. Controlled. Somebody processed it, carefully tested how much they could use without changing the taste. That detail shook me more than anything. Practice meant intent. That evening, Reyes said, "We've got probable cause for a warrant on Ethan's property." I told him, do it fast. He won't wait if he feels heat. Reyes warned, when this moves, it'll get ugly. I thought of Robert in that hospital bed. Ugly's already here. That night, I double-checked locks, threads, motion lights. Around midnight, I heard glass tap wood. Through the frosted window, a shadow slipped away. On the porch sat a brown box. I didn't touch it, called Reyes. Patel arrived, crouched. Feels like another bottle. Next day, Reyes confirmed it was empty with a note inside. Next time, that turned evidence into countdown. Next morning, Reyes said judge signed the warrant. Stay put. I told him not my first rodeo. He warned, could be your last. Linda later called Robert's coming home tomorrow. It didn't ease me. It reminded me what we almost lost. That night, I logged a card, warrant signed. Search tomorrow. I barely slept. Every sound was sharper. At dawn, I poured coffee I didn't drink. At 7:43, Reyes said, "We're rolling." By 8:15, I sat 2 blocks from Ethan's house in my old Ford watching squad cars pull up. I hadn't told Reyes, he'd have stopped me. But this was my fight too. Ethan's house looked picture-perfect suburban. I watched 2 officers approach Reyes behind them. One knocked. Long pause. The door opened, and there was my son Ethan, in a faded Cardinals shirt, arms crossed, tight, eyes hard. Reyes showed the paper, officers stepped in, and Ethan followed. I stayed in the truck, hands locked on the wheel. Time dragged. I imagined drawers opening papers, shifting the rhythm of a search I knew too well. My phone buzzed, a text from Reyes. Found something. We'll update. 20 minutes later, an officer walked out carrying an evidence bag. From my seat, I could see it, a whiskey bottle, same brand Ethan had sent me, half empty. My chest tightened. This wasn't the end. It was the start. At 9:05, Reyes spotted me. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Too late," I answered. "What did you find?" He leaned closer. A couple bottles, one open, residue inside, same powder Gary found, and a notebook. Looks like dosage notes. Trials. The word trials hit me hard. Robert hadn't been the first. Reyes didn't confirm. He didn't need to. I stared at the house, thinking of the boy I taught to ride a bike, the teen I drove to his first job, the man who married Leia. Now, he kept dosage notes. Reyes's radio crackled. "They're bringing him out." "You sure you want to see this?" he asked. "I've already seen enough." But I stayed. Ethan stepped out, cuffed, chin high, eyes cold. He scanned the street until he found me. Our eyes locked. No words. Just that look, the kind that erases history. Then they put him in the cruiser. Reyes came back. He's going downtown. He'll lawyer up. The notebook, if you want, I'll copy it for you. See if dates match anything. At the station, he laid it out. Ethan's handwriting leapt off the page. Gary joined on speaker. Triangle means half dose. Asterisk means watch for delayed effect. I flipped to one page dated 6 months back. Test, triangle, RC. My stomach dropped. Robert Carson. Reyes wrote it down. 2 pages later, another set, FD. My initials. Next to it, a solid number, no triangle. Gary's voice dropped. That's a lethal dose, Frank. The room tilted. Reyes said, "You were the other." Driving home, I replayed every meal, every drink. That bottle in my cabinet days before I gave it to Robert. My own son had been calculating not just 1 death, but 2. I kept thinking what might have happened if I'd poured just 1 glass for old time's sake. By evening, the news was running at local man, arrested in alleged poisoning attempt. They didn't name Ethan, but everyone in town knew. Linda called, whispering that neighbors were buzzing, and Robert was furious. If Ethan shows his face again, he'll... She stopped short. That night, I added a new card to the fireproof box, FD initials, in notebook lethal dose. The stack was thick now. Sitting on the porch in the heavy summer air, I wondered where justice ended and closure began. 2 mornings later, Reyes called. Frank, his lawyer's pushing a deal. Claims Ethan bought the whiskey from a buddy, didn't know it was tainted. But the notebook kills that story. Still, if he pleads, he'll serve time, maybe not much. Question is, do you want to see him in court? I stared out at the same street where Ethan learned to ride his bike. I'd always told myself family was my line, that no matter what, I wouldn't push him past a point of no return. But that was before Robert in a hospital bed, before my own initials in that notebook. At the station, Reyes introduced me to Mr. Caldwell, Ethan's attorney. The man shook my hand, smile sharp as glass. "Mr. Dalton, I think we can resolve this without the unpleasantness of trial." "You mean spare Ethan?" I said. He didn't blink. "Carelessness, not malice. Reduced charges. Some time, not much. And the notebook fiction, nothing more." I leaned back. "Do you know what it's like to see your initials next to a lethal dose, Mr. Caldwell, written by the kid you taught to fish, the one you drove across the state for his first baseball tryout?" For the first time, Caldwell looked away. "We're talking about avoiding a public spectacle, Mr. Dalton." I let the silence hang. Finally, I'll think about it. In the hall, Reyes caught me. "Frank DA's ready to file. We've got enough if you want the full trial. But if it were me, I'd make sure the next drink he serves doesn't put someone in the ground." That night, Robert called, his voice ragged but firm. "Frank, I heard about the deal. You can't take it. If you do, he'll think he can walk back from anything. Next time it won't be whiskey, it'll be worse. Maybe you, maybe someone else." His words hit hard like gravel, sharp and steady. By sunrise, I was on my way to see Gary. Gary was in his shop hands, deep in an old motor when I told him about the plea deal. He wiped his palms on a rag. "Frank, a man who keeps dosage notes, isn't careless. He's deliberate. Go easy now, and you're giving him paper for the next list." Later, I drove past Ethan's house, blinds drawn, driveway, empty. I thought of that garage where at 16 he fixed his first car. Back then I saw a promise. Now I wondered if it was only proof he knew how to dismantle. At home, I spread the evidence cards across the table. They mattered more than anything. The decision clicked shut in me like a locked door. I called Reyes, "Tell the DA I'll testify." Full charges. 3 days later, Ethan entered court in County Orange. His eyes sharpened when he found me like I was back on his list. The hearing felt less like a courtroom and more like a minefield. Reyes testified first, steady and crisp. Caldwell objected twice, overruled. Then it was my turn. Yes, Ethan is my son. I said the words heavy. I described the bottle, the handwriting, Robert in the hospital. I kept to the facts. Then Caldwell rose, voice smooth. You claim you recognize my client's handwriting. I don't claim. I know. But you haven't seen it in 3 years. Could you be mistaken, no? He leaned closer. So you'd ruin a man's life because you think a note looks like your son's heat climbed in my chest? I don't think. I know. Caldwell produced a report, a handwriting expert claiming Ethan didn't write the note. The judge allowed it. My stomach dropped. Then Caldwell twisted the knife. Isn't it true you and my client have had a strained relationship, that you sold his mother's farm without consulting him? Objection. Sustained. But the jury had heard it. Outside, Robert waited on his cane. They're just clouding the water, he said. That report bought and paid for. I've seen it before. That night on the porch, I replayed Caldwell's words, how he tried to paint me as bitter, not a father betrayed. 3 years sober, yet I felt like I'd swallowed fire. The next morning, Reyes called. Frank, we pulled Ethan's texts. Messages to a contact marked RC the night before Robert got sick. Not Robert Carson, a burner phone. The texts read like instructions, dosage, timing, and they match Gary's lab results. The DA will have them by noon. This changes everything. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again, Caldwell's voice smooth as always, Mr. Dalton. Caldwell's call came sharp as a blade. You should know your testimony today. It only made me more certain you're letting old wounds cloud your judgment. If you push this to trial, everything about your past with Ethan comes out. Everything. You ready for that? He hung up before I answered. That evening, I drove to the lake. The water was still sun-low and orange. I thought of Linda's laughter, the boy Ethan once was, and Robert pale in a hospital bed. By the time I left, I knew I wasn't stepping back. The morning of trial, I didn't shave. I wanted the jury to see every line of work, loss, and betrayal. The courtroom buzzed as I walked in. Reyes nodded from the back. Ethan entered in county orange eyes, scanning until they landed on me. No smirk this time, just something cold and unreadable. The DA's opening was crisp. This is a case about trust. Trust given and trust betrayed. You will hear how Ethan Dalton knowingly sent a gift laced with deadly poison to his father. Jurors leaned forward. No one looked away. Caldwell followed smooth as ever, painting me as bitter, resentful, twisting property disputes into motive. Robert Carson testified, first steady on his cane. I remember the taste. Bitter. Within an hour I couldn't stand. Thought it was my heart. Turns out it was someone else's idea entirely. The jury listened hard. When Caldwell suggested Robert's meds caused it, Robert shut him down, quiet son. 10 years on those meds, never ended up in a hospital until that night. Reyes took the stand with the phone records, texts to a burner, dosage, instructions, timestamps. The judge overruled Caldwell's objections. When Reyes read one aloud, make sure he gets it all in the first pour. Won't take much with his heart. The courtroom went still. Then it was me. I told the story straight, birthdays, the bottle, Robert in the hospital. I kept to the facts, though the edges of pain bled through. Caldwell pressed hard. Mr. Dalton, are you aware my client claims this was a gift purchased by his wife without his knowledge? No. And I don't believe it. You don't believe it because you don't want to believe it. You've built this entire case on assumptions. No, I cut in, on evidence. The kind your client left on that bottle. The judge reminded me to speak only when asked, but Caldwell's jaw had already tightened. By afternoon, both sides rested. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments. Outside, I barely cleared the doors when I heard Dad. Ethan stood by the checkpoint, a deputy at his side. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" "No," I said. "It makes me a man who's still alive." His lip curled. "This isn't over." That night, Reyes called. Caldwell had filed for mistrial, claiming evidence was late. "It won't stick," Reyes said. "They're just trying to shake you before tomorrow." The next morning, I put on the jacket I'd worn to Linda's funeral, not for sentiment, just to remind myself I'd already survived worse. The DA opened strong. "You have heard the testimony. You have seen the evidence. This was no accident. It was deliberate. We ask you to return the only verdict that reflects the truth, guilty." Caldwell countered with talk of doubt, family grudges, and motives. But when the jury left, I saw in their faces more certainty than hesitation. Robert dozed in the hallway beside his cane. Then the bailiff called us in. The foreman stood. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant." That pause felt like years. Then guilty. It wasn't dramatic. No gasps, just a shift in the air, and for the first time in 3 years, I could breathe. The judge sentenced Ethan to 25 years parole only after 15. Ethan didn't blink. Hands cuffed, eyes fixed on some far point. As they let him out, he turned just once. Our eyes locked. For a moment, I saw the boy I'd taught to throw a baseball. His lips barely moved. This isn't the last chapter. Later outside, Robert put a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to, Frank. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I walked alone to my truck. On the seat sat an envelope with Ethan's belongings and a note in his handwriting. "You always said we were more alike than I wanted to admit. Maybe now you'll see that's not a compliment." I folded it back into the glove box, started the engine. For the first time in years, the silence felt real. Robert recovered quicker than the doctors predicted, though he never touched whiskey again. One afternoon, Gary showed up with a paper bag. Inside was the vial he'd tested. "Thought you might want this," he said. "Not a trophy, just a reminder." I set it beside the glass Robert had sipped from. Together they looked ordinary. I knew better. 2 months after the verdict, Detective Reyes stopped by after a fishing trip, leaning on my porch rail. "They traced the poison," he said. "Wasn't Ethan's idea at first. His wife's cousin works landscaping, knew how to pull it from white snake root. Thought he was helping. Ethan chose to send it. It didn't erase anything, just proved betrayal rarely grows alone." That winter, I fixed the porch swing, the same one I'd sat on the day the package arrived. The chains held steady now, the boards smooth. On the table beside me sat the glass, the vial, and a sealed envelope labeled, "Do not open." Inside, photos of Ethan, court papers, his note. Someday I'd decide whether to keep it or burn it. For now, it stayed shut. People think revenge ends when the gavel drops. Truth is, it lingers in the years stolen, the empty chairs at dinner, the words never spoken. Justice gave me safety. Peace, though, that has to be built. One quiet afternoon at a time. I lifted my coffee toward the empty yard. "To endings," I said. "And whatever comes after."